Hello, welcome everyone. I am Joanna Suarez, news anchor for Univision Communications. Thank you for joining us today for a virtual conversation on ocean conservation and some of the opportunities we have to move forward ocean climate action nationwide and locally in Florida. Today, we're joined by Representative Kathy Castor, Chairwoman of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and leading ocean advocates who are moving forward ocean conservation and climate action nationwide, ensuring we create a planet that is not only sustainable, but equitable for all communities. To all, thank you for being with us today. For the first part of this conversation, I'm pleased to welcome Kathy Castor, Chairwoman of the U.S. Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, who will be sharing some remarks, and then that'll be followed by a Q&A from leaders and members from environmental organizations. Chairwoman, thank you again and welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Joanna. It's an honor to be with you. Let me start by maybe explaining what the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis is, but I'm coming to you from my home in Tampa, Florida. I'm a native Floridian. I was born in Miami, grew up in Tampa, lived here all my life, and I know what makes Florida special are oceans, the Gulf of Mexico on my coast and the Atlantic Ocean, the beautiful Florida Keys. It defines our way of life, and we have to do everything we can to protect it. That's why I was so proud when Speaker Nancy Pelosi asked me to chair the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and the job was quite large that she tasked us with. She said, Kathy, please help us develop a plan for the Congress to solve the climate crisis. Well, that's an enormous task, but after very broad outreach to citizen activists, scientists, farmers, entrepreneurs, the faith leaders, the immigration community, just enormous broad outreach, we brought all of their recommendations together into a plan, a climate crisis action plan to solve global warming and help our communities adapt and become more resilient. We know how important that is in Florida. We depend on a healthy ocean. For tourism, for fishing, and more. It's crucial that we protect our coral reefs, our beautiful beaches, and marine life. And we've all watched over the past years how the warming planet has stressed these places and things that we love, leading to declines in biodiversity, shifting fish stocks in Florida. So ocean climate action is particularly crucial. So as we work on our plan to solve the climate crisis, we put the ocean solutions front and center. Last Congress, I teamed up with the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, Raul Grijalva of Arizona, to develop a piece of legislation that called the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act. The bill would unleash the power of the ocean, and also we want to pair that with prohibitions on offshore oil drilling. It's a direct threat to our way of life here in Florida. I remember very well the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, and not only did we suffer loss of life there, but people lost their jobs because the oil kept spewing out. Even though we didn't have it on the shores on the west coast of Florida, the tourists thought the beaches were polluted and they stayed away. And that's these kind of threats, the dependence on fossil fuels, the warming planet, all having various serious impacts. So thankfully, we have a new partner in the White House and President Joe Biden. He's already issued a direction that we're going to set a new, very ambitious goal to conserve 30% of our lands and waters. They will help capture carbon over time and really give us the tools we need to become more resilient to the climate crisis. So I think the best days are ahead of us. I think that climate change now, we know this is going to be an enormous task to solve. The costs are escalating, the impacts are becoming more harmful. But there is an enormous opportunity ahead of us to create jobs in clean energy and to help strengthen our infrastructure and make our communities healthier, more resilient, with an element of equity and environmental justice as well.
And definitely there is an ally in the White House. I want to ask you to start this conversation before I turn it over to the environmental organizations to give us some perspective. What is 30 by 30 and why should we all care?
That's a great question. And people will start to hear 30 by 30 and think, what is that? That means that we need to protect 30% of our lands and waters by the year 2030. This is an enormous goal, but it's something we can do. Right here in the state of Florida, a few years ago, Florida voters passed a lands conservation amendment. They believe that in order to keep Florida special, we have to conserve our environmental lands and our beaches and oceans. We need to do that on a national scale now, and only by setting that very ambitious goal and then putting policy and federal investment behind it are we going to be able to achieve it. And that means that, again, we capture carbon, take it out of the atmosphere, but we also prepare in a better way, a stronger way, for the floods, the wildfires, all of those climate impacts that if we don't get a handle on this now, I'm afraid it's going to become entirely, it's going to become more costly. It's going to compromise our health. And I know that we can do it, and we can create thousands and thousands of good paying jobs helping to conserve our environmental lands and oceans.
And definitely there is a sense of urgency. And now the next question comes from the ocean champion at COP26 and Mission Blue advisor, Max Bello. Max.
Hi, good morning, Representative Castor. My name is Max Bello. I'm Chilean. I'm here in Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure for me because I not only working as a champion now for the COP26, but also I work with someone you might know, Sylvia Earle. She's my colleague and friend. I was just talking with her, who have her heart in Florida, and she kind of started this love for the ocean actually in Florida. So she's always very connected with your state. So very happy to be here. And very happy to hear you as well on these different topics, because I think it's key. We understand this, acronyms and numbers and all of these things because it means life in the end. I mean, ocean is life, is the source of life. 30 by 30 of the ocean, the need to be protected. It is also, to recognize the role of the ocean for life on Earth, humanity itself. So very happy to hear all of these great words from you. And I wanted to also acknowledge in this great commitment of the current administration to bring together this incredible summit these days. I really love to see all of these presidents around the world now coming together. President Piñera from my own country making specific ocean new announcements on even going for high seas, new marine protected area in Nazca Reach, one of the most important things. So we should continue the conversations on how we all together, we try to, work on this. But I have a very specific question for you. And you as the chair of the Select Committee on Climate Crisis. So you definitely are one of the most important leaders on ocean and climate action in the Congress. And last year, the committee provided extensive recommendations on ocean protection and restoration. What are the next steps to bring those recommendations to reality? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your love and care of our communities across the Western Hemisphere and the oceans. And thank you for mentioning the great scientist, Sylvia Earle, who spent a good amount of time here in the Tampa Bay area. She is an inspiration to all of us. And hopefully all of your work will be an inspiration to the Congress to follow through on our climate crisis action plan recommendations for the oceans. That means there are a lot of pieces to it, but hopefully these are policies that can bring Democrats and Republicans together, and we really need everyone's help to push their policymakers, members of Congress, to do it. First, let's talk about actually restoring an appreciation and respect for science across all of the governmental agencies, whether you're talking about the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Interior that oversees our oceans and conservation lands and forests, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, NOAA. These agencies all have very important missions. And I think first and foremost, the Biden team now has appointed a climate dream team, folks that are steeped in scientific knowledge and know-how. You pair that now with what the public is demanding, action to protect our oceans and special natural places. So here's where it hits in policy. You have to fund our environmental agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, NOAA, and others. Last year, we also passed the bipartisan Great American Outdoors Act, which made funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund permanent. That's vital. Now it's up to the Biden administration in partnership with states and local communities to make sure those funds get to the local level. Here in the state of Florida, we could use some more help at the state level as well to make sure we're doing all we can and we're drawing down our fair share of money. But that's a significant amount of money. It's about $900 million per year that we can put to work conserving these special places. We've also increased discretionary funding for Department of Interior to make sure that they have the resources they need to sequester carbon, protect our forests, not turn them into logging or expand mining, but really think about the true challenges of the climate. We passed legislation to reduce marine debris and ocean plastic and advance ocean science in that realm. We need the public to continue to press policymakers to make sure that is happening. And now we're with President Biden. We're very excited about the work ahead toward a strong national ocean policy. We need a cohesive, comprehensive effort on the oceans to reduce climate impacts and really protect our way of life.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And it is very encouraging to hear this kind of commitment and resources for these agencies. That's so crucial. Thank you for that. The next question comes from Natalia Ortiz. She's the Director of Development of the Clio Institute. Welcome, Natalia.
Hi, how are you, Congressman?
Good morning.
I too am from Florida. I'm from Miami. I was raised here. I'm now raising my 2 children here. And one of the things that we often forget when we're talking about these environmental issues is the economy. And we know that the health of our oceans is tied to our economy, having contributed approximately $307 billion to the US GDP and supported 3.3 million jobs in 2017 alone. Yet we still don't see a huge bipartisan appetite to protect these incredibly important and fragile resources. So my question is more about civic engagement, not just as the Clio Institute, but as a Floridian myself. How can organizations and people help build bipartisan support in Congress to advance ocean climate action in the 30 by 30? What can we do to hold our elected leaders accountable or show them appreciation for protecting our oceans? So, knowing how Congress works, I would like you to choose one thing. What do you think would create the most impact? More intense media coverage, number 1. Number 2, letters to our elected officials. Number 3, is it social media engagement with them? Or number 4, is it phone banking? What do you think is the most impactful with regards to your colleagues?
Well, Natalia, thank you very much. And the Clio Institute, you're on the right track. I've really enjoyed working with all of you and learning from you on what it means to advance creative climate solutions and encouragement for policymakers. I think the most impactful way to press members of Congress right now to take action to protect our oceans and our way of life is organizing an effort right in their very own districts that communicates the economic benefits of acting on climate, one way or the other. For example, there is a company called Ørsted now that is planning for large offshore wind turbines to generate good, clean, renewable energy off the east coast of the US. I thought, oh, that's great for renewable energy production. But it turns out the company said, no, Congresswoman, this will really help your district in Tampa, especially your port, because we're going to build the vessels that will help us install those offshore wind turbines and service those wind turbines for years to come. So this project, it might be far off in the Atlantic Ocean off the east coast of the United States, but I'm going to see an economic benefit right here in the Tampa Bay area as they hire workers and employ companies to build those ships and vessels. And I think there's a story to be told in every district across America, whether it's making South Florida more resilient to climate impacts by cleaning up water systems, wastewater systems, protecting the Florida Keys, protecting our coral reefs that are a source of tourism revenue, whether it's in the Midwest, in farms, how farmers want the tools necessary to sequester carbon, improve the soil health. There is a story to be told for the opportunities and economic benefits of climate action in each and every district across America. And with the know-how of folks like you at the Clio Institute, I know we can tell those stories.
Thank you, Congresswoman. The next question comes from Shanna Edberg, Director of Conservation Program at the Hispanic Access Foundation. Shanna, welcome.
Hi, Chairwoman. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Hi, Shanna.
I'm Shauna Edberg with Hispanic Access Foundation, and it's a pleasure to meet you. To tell you a little bit about what we do, Hispanic Access Foundation is a national nonprofit with a mission to connect Latinos with partners and opportunities to improve lives and create an equitable society. So we're really focused on building Latino leaders in all aspects of life and society. In our conservation program in particular, we activate Latino climate and conservation leaders and provide them with the resources they need to be effective advocates. We care a lot about protecting 30% of US lands, waters, and ocean by 2030, and we want to make sure it's done in such a way that promotes equity and justice for Latinos and communities of color. And we also work hard on reducing pollution and climate change and ensuring our communities are informed, engaged, and prepared for all the climate impacts that are here and those that are to come. So all that said, my question for you today is, climate change and ocean protection are not just environmental issues, but also tie into social, economic, and health considerations, as you know. Oftentimes, well-meaning environmental policies have negative consequences on communities of color in these areas. So how can we ensure that not only do we reach our environmental goals, but we do it in such a way that underserved communities are not left behind and the holistic well-being of communities of color is lifted?
Isn't that true? And thank you for your advocacy. And I'm grateful to you for training the young activists who are looking for a way to truly make a difference. And now is the time. I think we understand that for too long, so many communities on the front line, communities of color, our lower income neighborhoods have really carried the burden of dirtier air, dirtier water, and chronic underinvestment. So in our climate crisis action plan, we say as we move to a clean energy economy and provide the resources to make our local communities more resilient and healthier, we have to pay extra attention to those frontline communities. And luckily now we have a partner in the White House and President Biden. He already has said announced a Justice 40 initiative, meaning that 40% of the investments we make in clean energy and resilience will be targeted to those communities that have long carried the burden of dirty water and the toxic polluting plants. I mean, it's no surprise when you drive around the state of Florida or the country, when you go to industrial areas, often they're cited in communities that don't have a lot of political power, that are lower income communities. That's not fair. It's a civil rights issue, really. So now we want to make up for really that. There's a reckoning across the country that we can do better and we can lift up those communities. So when we say 40% of the investments, think about right now the federal government partners with states and local communities for water systems, wastewater systems, to also create jobs, put people to work in strengthening our shorelines, in restoring our wetlands. We really intend across the government, as we move forward with the American Jobs Plan, an infrastructure package, to have environmental justice at the center and make sure that the money follows the commitment. Talk is cheap, but we can, if we follow through and make those investments, I think we can lift up our neighbors who need it and really follow through, meet America's promise that all people should be created equal. All people are created equal and should be treated equally.
It is wonderful to hear that kind of investment. I know living in LA and in Texas, I do see those inequities in the levels of asthma and the pollution in Los Angeles, I remember. So it's wonderful to hear of that investment. Thank you so much, Chairwoman. Now we'll turn it to Marcos Villar. He's the Executive Director of Alianza for Progress. Welcome.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the wonderful work that you're doing on this issue, first of all. And I want to repeat, my name is Marcos Villar. I'm the Executive Director of Alianza for Progress, an organization that is really focused on leadership and civic engagement in the Latino community here in Florida. And we believe that a leader cannot be a leader today if they're not actively working to advance solutions to climate change, and in specific, taking care of our environment, both in land and the ocean. Scientists have mentioned that 90% of the global warming is happening in the oceans. And so that is something that when I learned, really refocused and sort of made me think about the importance of oceans in relationship to the crisis of climate change. And they've also said that if we are able to protect 30% of the oceans, we can then, the oceans can heal themselves. It's a way basically of allowing the planet to cleanse itself and clean itself and become inviting and promoting, all the good things in the species and the plants and the process of creating obviously a better and cleaner environment and solving the problem of climate change. So my question is, when it comes to protecting 30% of our oceans by 2030, where do you see opportunities for advancing this initiative with this new administration and Congress? And in addition, what reasons do you have to be optimistic about the ocean and climate change in 2021?
Well, thank you, Marcos, and thank you for everything Alianza for Progress is doing. You are truly making a difference, and the time is now. I've never been more optimistic. I mean, look at what has happened just recently with President Biden returning the United States of America to our leadership role in the world in bringing together the countries across the planet to up their ambition for carbon pollution reduction goals. I mean, we even had the leader of China, even Vladimir Putin from Russia there, but more importantly, this cohesive, all-encompassing group of world leaders, the leading world economies, young activists, scientists, Pope Francis there to help lead the way. We're all in this together, and I think there's been a realization that it's the United States of America that has to be this convening authority to it. But with that comes a lot of responsibility. And what I'm seeing throughout the Biden-Harris administration now is they understand this very significant responsibility. As Johanna mentioned, we're running out of time. It's urgent. We must act with urgency, but we do have the tools necessary to accomplish this. There have been scientific report after scientific report on clean energy, on ocean solutions, on how we conserve our the special places across the planet. Now we have to just follow through and adopt those policies into law. And I think the stars are aligned now in the Congress, in the House and Senate, in partnership with all of you to accomplish these things. We know the Congress now has been tasked with hammering out a new American jobs plan that has infrastructure and job opportunities at the fore, but will come along with clean energy solutions, greater resiliency, and tools based upon pillars of environmental justice and fair labor standards for workers. Because if we're going to truly make these significant investments across the board, they have to bring everyone along. Everyone has a role to play, every member of Congress. We need bipartisan solutions, but if some of our friends in the GOP are not going to come along, we need to act. So I'm grateful to you. I'm excited to work with President Biden, as well as local leaders, business leaders in the private sector, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. The time is now.
Thank you, Congresswoman. The next question comes from Mariana del Valle Cervantes. She's the clean water and ocean advocate from Green Latinos. Mariana, welcome. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Congresswoman Castor, for being here today, joining us on this conversation. We really appreciate, and we are so grateful for your leadership. And like they mentioned, my name is Mariana, and I am with Green Latinos. And Green Latinos convince an active comunidad of Latino, Latina, Latinx leaders emboldened by the power of wisdom of our culture, united to demand equity and dismantle racism, resource to win environmental conservation and climate justice battles, and driven to secure our political, economic, cultural, and environmental liberation. You mentioned the stars are aligned. There's this infrastructure and jobs bill that's being considered, and it's being considered also under reconciliation. And some will say that this is the one shot that we have on, making sure that climate change bill passes in Congress and with this presidency. If that is what happens, you mentioned a little bit about what can be included in the language of this infrastructure bill, and how it can help restore the health of our ocean. And so with that in mind, what part of the natural solution to the climate crisis can we include in this infrastructure bill?
Well, thank you, Mariana. It's good to see you. I remember before COVID and coronavirus, I was with a great group of your folks in Washington, D.C. as we kicked off a series of meetings all across Capitol Hill. So I look forward to getting back to that in person. So this, yes, the American Jobs Plan and possible action under this technical reconciliation is going to be very, very important. But this is not a one-time thing. This is climate action, clean energy, the health of our families, keeping faith, our moral obligation to our children. That is going to be an ongoing effort that is going to require everyone to press ahead. Yes, we need to focus now on being as ambitious as possible in the passage of the American Jobs Plan. That means a clean energy standard, investment in a clean macro grid that'll help expand renewable energy across the country, especially to the state of Florida. I mean, they call us the Sunshine State, but we generate very little electricity from solar power. We need to change that. And that will only benefit our oceans, the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic Ocean that really defines our way of life. So focus on the Congress now in pressing policymakers, Democrats and Republicans, to be as ambitious as possible on clean energy, resilience, and improving our health. But look over the long term. What else can we be doing in our own communities? What can we do to press the policymakers in Tallahassee to do better, to unleash the power of clean energy for the benefit of all of our neighbors here, and set high goals? That's how we will accomplish great things, all working together, working to achieve, and again, thinking about the moral obligation we have to our kids and future generations to act now.
Congresswoman, thinking about long-term, you were mentioning it, President Biden made a very ambitious commitment last week to cut carbon emissions by up to as much as 52% by 2030. How can we make sure that this goal remains regardless of who's in the White House?
That is a great point. The most important thing is to pass the American Jobs Plan into law. I mean, kudos to President Biden for, again, restoring America's leadership role in the world and putting science and equity at the center of what he's doing. That, you're right, it is a very ambitious goal to cut our carbon pollution by 50%, but we know we can do it. A lot of that will come in the power sector by transitioning to renewable energy. A lot of it will come through transportation and the cars we drive, the buses on the street. Think about the improvements to the health of our kids if they can ride clean electric school buses, and our neighbors who rely on the bus to get to work and home can ride on clean electric buses, and we have better transit that will improve the health. To make it permanent, we have to act ambitiously now, enact these into law, don't just set goals and not follow through, and continue to elect policymakers who understand the urgency of this moment, who also understand the escalating cost and the harmful impacts, and the fact that if we don't enact permanent solutions, it's going to become a whole lot more expensive and just plain hot here in Florida unless we make real accomplished action.
Definitely. We also have a lot of power with our vote. Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for your time, for your leadership, for your commitment to ocean protection and climate action. And thank you to all the organizational leaders and participants. With this, we conclude this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For the second part of this conversation, we're gonna be learning more about the 30 by 30 initiative. We have a great group of ocean leaders today to discuss opportunities and challenges ahead and how the 30 by 30 framework will impact not only our oceans, but the communities that it serves. And I wanna welcome to the panel, Marce Gutierrez Graudange, Executive Director of Azul. She was the founder. Azul is a nonprofit organization based in California that works on ocean conservation with Latinos. Welcome, Marcela, to this conversation.
Gracias.
Also, I want to welcome Juan Mayorga. He's an assistant specialist from the Marine Science Institute at the Marine Science Institute in the University of California in Santa Barbara. Thank you so much. He's a researcher, a scientist. Thank you for being with us. Raimundo Espinosa is the Executive Director of Conservación Conciencia, which is an organization, a nonprofit that's based in Puerto Rico. This nonprofit focuses on environmental research and conservation. Thank you for being with us, and good afternoon to all of you. I want to start with Juan. Juan, can you explain the science behind 30 by 30? Why 30% by 2030?
Yeah.
There is a growing consensus among scientists that the current levels of ocean protection are insufficient. Decades of research have shown us the depletion of ocean ecosystems, fisheries, apex predators like sharks and tunas. And among the years, we have been collecting all of this data, and we have come to the conclusion that this is not enough. Now, why 30? Well, science has shown that 30%, it's on average a good amount of protection of different amount of ecosystems to achieve multiple objectives, not only biodiversity, but also fisheries, carbon, and other ecosystem services that the ocean provides for us. That being said, it doesn't mean that if we protect 29%, then we failed, or if we protect 31%, then we're done, and the rest we can do whatever we want with the ocean. Really, the number 30, it's a number to get us all behind this momentum and this initiative to protect more of the ocean. And then the exact number is less important than the realization that this is not sufficient. And then why by 30 by 30? Why by 2030? Well, this is just an urgent matter. We are seeing fisheries depleted, ocean ecosystems collapsing, and we were not able to achieve the biodiversity conservation targets that we set out in Aichi, Japan back in 2010. So the urgency is amounting.
Thank you, Juan Raimundo. In your organization, Conservación Conciencia, apart from you guys focusing on environmental research and conservation, you promote sustainable development, and you've collaborated with commercial fishers. How would 30 by 30 impact this industry in particular in Puerto Rico?
So thank you for having me on your panel. And so that 30 by 30 for Puerto Rico specifically is something that would be very beneficial for the commercial fishing industry. Mainly because in Puerto Rico, all commercial fishing activity is small scale and artisanal, meaning that, and we only have about 1,200 fishermen on island. A lot of the fishing activity that already goes on in Puerto Rico is it's already in tune with a lot of conservation practices. It's also heavily managed. So it's something that we've already begun to collaborate with the fishing sector to ensure that we move towards sustainability. Again, when we talk about marine protected areas and management of the oceans, a lot of the first people to be impacted by this are coastal communities, and one of them is the fishing community. And so, like Juan mentioned, it's one of the industries that has affected it, but it's also impacted by the measures that we need to take. But at the same time, it's also one of the ones that's creating a lot of the impacts. So there needs to be collaboration, and that's what we try to do, so that we don't create animosity and that we don't clash, but that we can collaborate to improve fishing means as well as the income for these local communities. A lot of the science that we create, a lot of the data that we collect is based on the information that fishing communities and coastal communities can begin to generate. They're the first line of observers that we have. Folks like us, we're the marine scientists. We're not on the water every day, even though we wish we could be. Fishers, they are. So it's one of the things that we need to begin to see how we can further strengthen those ties to, one, help create sustainable income and keep promoting sustainable extraction. Because we have to realize that it's an extractive industry that if it's not regulated and if it's not in tune with the environment, it does create devastation. So that's one of the things that we really need to continue collaborating on.
Marcela, you're one of the first Latino groups working on ocean conservation in California, in the US actually. How do you see things changing? How have you seen them change in terms of opening the ocean conversation to all communities? And are Latinos really engaged and interested in this topic?
Yes, I think that it's a conversation about something that's always been in the background for us, whether it's a different relationship, but or a different focus is a new thing. But in the end, we've always had a deep and strong relationship with the ocean, and I think that we've had strong existing, let's just talk about that, existing relationship with the ocean. But when we talk to folks about this, you know, a lot of the people that we talk to about here all over the US actually would tell us that there's really this interesting concept that they talk about, sort of like the under the same moon. Same thing with the ocean. So we'll talk to people and they talk about the ocean as this connection to their homeland. So, you know, I've had folks that tell me like the same Pacific Ocean that I bathed in when I was a child in Guerrero is the same one that it feels like it's the same one when I go into in Los Angeles. And obviously it's different currents and all this stuff, but it's really exciting to see that. So yes, obviously I think that there is a rising conversation, the same way that there's a rising conversation within the US community at large. It is the, you know, we did have the super decade of the ocean that we're starting. So I do think that it's in general that it's coming up, but it's exciting to see our community stepping up and stepping in for conservation.
Juan, I want to go back to you because you mentioned that we shouldn't focus so much on the number. I want you to please talk to me. First, tell me the difference between fully protected and highly protected, and also why is it so important that that we do this? I mean, there's a sense of urgency. We need to do it now.
Yeah. So there are several classes of marine protected areas out there. And those that I describe or I call highly or fully protected areas are those that have the core principle of nature conservation at its core, and are those that limit and prohibit all sorts of extractive and industrial activities, but may allow subsistence fishing or artisanal fishing within them. So very, very small amount of human disturbance. So those are the highly and fully protected areas. Then we have a large suite of other protected areas that are classified as lightly or minimally protected. Now, what's important here is that all of the science that we have that tells us the benefits that we can get from protected areas, such as increasing biodiversity, abundance, highest catches for fisheries, all of those studies come from highly or fully protected areas. Those are the ones that generate most of those benefits. Unfortunately, today, only less than 3% of the planet is within one of those highly or fully protected areas. In the United States, total protection is about 26%. And out of that 26%, we have 23 in highly or fully protected areas. However, most of those are in the large national marine national monuments in the Central Pacific. So for example, the Southeast, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean regions have very, very, very little protection in them. In the US, only, I think it's 1% of the state waters is protected, and 0.01% of federal waters is protected. So this is outside of those large national monuments. There's a lot of progress to be made in the US, as well as in the entire world. And why don't focus too much on the number? Well, I think the number, it's important to bring people together and to bring nations together. But the problem is, some people may say, okay, so we protected 30 and then we're done. We can do whatever we want with the remaining 70%. And that's not true. We need to manage the ocean entirely as one, holistically sustainable. So that's why I want to emphasize that 30 is not enough. We need to manage the entire ocean sustainably.
And there's also a spillover effect. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, of course. So when we create these protected areas, we assign them and we put them in the right places, and we make sure that they are properly implemented and managed and monitored. Well, it's simple. When we stop killing fish, the fish grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's more of them. And as these fish get bigger and bigger, they reproduce exponentially. They reproduce much, much more. And all of these offsprings and larvae help to replenish the fisheries, not only inside, not only the communities inside the protected area, but all throughout the region. So it is this spillover of larvae, but also the movement of these large adult fish that has the potential to increase catches outside of the protected area and serve some as a savings account, if you think about it. It is really a part of that fishery that is left unfished, so it continues providing for the rest of the fishery on the long term.
I love that analogy with the savings account. Raimundo, when making the decision on what to protect, how can we make sure that we keep all communities and perspectives in mind?
So that's something that's really critical, having a full participatory process when you're designating it. Like Juan mentioned, like the key location is really important, but also involving key stakeholders from the ground up. Many times, really well-intentioned efforts have failed because the wrong people have been included, or there seems to be some kind of, it seems to be that the community might be excluded and there's big dollars behind it. So sometimes transparency is also something that's very critical. At the same time, like Juan mentioned, it can be a savings account, but sometimes a lot of the impacts to marine protected areas aren't from the marine environment. Sometimes they're land-based. And so when you include these local communities, they are able to bring a lot of information to help the management process for those marine resources. Because a lot of times, like Juan said, the fish are being extracted, but sometimes the impacts are to the habitat, so to the seafloor. And so if you don't have a place for fish to live, you don't have reefs for them to live, fish aren't, even though the fish might be there, they're going to leave anyway. So it's a lot of things that citizen science can help with, and really including these communities that have traditional and local knowledge that no matter how much science you have, again, data is the basis for that information. And a lot of these times, these communities have that baseline information that we need as scientists and managers to really create the correct implementation for a lot of these protected areas. So that we need to continue to implement. So, and I'd like to mention right now, for like Juan mentioned, that there's a lot of areas within the US that aren't protected. But for example, Puerto Rico has 26% of its state waters protected. And so that doesn't mean that we've reached or it's enough. We still need to continue moving towards them being effectively managed. And so, we're not done here, and even though we have a high percentage of protection. So that's something that we need to continue working forward, involving as many stakeholders, because again, as we include stakeholders, we also including different industries, sectors of folks that are having impacts to the ocean environment, whether they know it or not.
And I think that's very important when you mentioned, or what Juan mentioned, that only 3% of U.S. oceans are protected, and mainly in the Pacific Ocean. We need to protect the different kinds of environments because we have kelp forests, we have coral reefs, we have all kinds of environments that need to be protected as well. There has to be greater diversity. Marce, as a community and environmental leader, what are some of the opportunities that you see in 30 by 30 when protecting our oceans in communities from climate change?
I think I think it's important to highlight what Raimundo just said. Participation is probably the biggest part. I myself was a part of a stakeholder process back in 2008 when California established what was at the time the first statewide network of marine protected areas. And I think that once you have the buy-in, you're guaranteeing, and that process certainly could have been done significantly better, but hindsight is 2020. But at the same time, when you actually have the community, you're guaranteeing, or not guaranteeing, but you're really advancing the opportunity that the community is going to benefit from it. And so that's the first and most important thing. Obviously, when we talk about climate, ocean climate action, the ocean is a big carbon sink. But it doesn't work unless it's a healthy ocean. And we've already had, a significant amount of carbon that's actually already shielding us from the worst effects of climate change. And we need to continue to care for the ocean so that we can really avert the worst effects of climate change.
And it seems like we're doing better in the US. Obviously, we're doing better on ocean protection than in land protection. Juan, when considering what areas to protect, what comes into play? What is that process? And how can we influence it so different environments are, I don't know if the right word is environments, but are protected?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things that come into play when trying to decide where to protect in the ocean. One of them, as you mentioned, is representativity of different ecoregions or different ecosystems, right? So as you mentioned, and you highlighted coral reefs, kelp forests, Arctic ecosystems, all of those are currently underrepresented in the existing network of protected areas in the US. But the reality is that if you were to plan protected areas, let's say for biodiversity only, you might get a different answer than if you were to plan for protected areas for fisheries only, or if you were to plan for protected areas for carbon only. So then you have multiple objectives. The ocean is a multi-use environment, and therefore when we're thinking about protected areas, we need to be thinking about all of those multi-uses simultaneously to try to avoid big trade-offs between these objectives. On top of that, we need, of course, to take into account the social considerations. We need to take into account the waters and lands of indigenous communities and bring along all of the stakeholders. So there is not a single answer to where should we put the 30% that we need to protect. It really depends on what communities and what society cares about. And fortunately, today we have tools and data and frameworks that allow us to do just that and create conservation plans that are inclusive, comprehensive, and that take this broader view of conservation into account.
And now that you talked about that, Raimundo, I know you mentioned it briefly. Are we doing a good job at bringing all the voices together that are impacted? And what can we do better? If you could please talk a little bit more about that, Raimundo.
Yeah, I feel that we're starting to do a better job. We're starting to do a better job of being more inclusive of a lot of the communities. But I mean, we're still not there yet. I mean, it's we're not there yet of being fully inclusive and really figuring out and respecting and understanding. And it's especially the Caribbean, the U.S. Caribbean, the insular Caribbean, the entire U.S. Is such a melting pot, such a diverse community of cultures that I don't think we'll ever fully understand each other. But we need to begin with respect. And again, when we talk about being fully engaged, we need to be fully transparent. And like Juan said, this is multi-use. There needs to be marine spatial planning. There's several stakeholders. There's so many stakeholders that have so many different uses for the oceans that none of us will ever be able to see that ahead of time without including those other communities. So I think we've begun to do that. We're doing a lot better than we were before, but we can still do better. And I think we can still fully include a lot more folks, a lot more communities to really understand how we can get the best protection that fully fits and benefits all of society in provides the greatest benefit to all of us. So I think we're in the good direction. I think we're really in a good direction for sustainability, for economic benefits, for environmental protection. But we really don't have that much time to be taking with that. That I think we do need to have a heavier foot on the accelerator in the inclusion for full protection of additional protected areas. But we're in the right direction, and I just feel that we can still do better, but we're on our way.
Yeah, definitely. There is a sense of urgency right now. Marce, how can individuals get involved and locally, especially, what are some of the most effective ways a person can participate in this conversation and make a difference in their community?
Well, first of all, you can learn more about the 30 by 30 initiative. What's really exciting about this is that really it's a global goal. So wherever anybody is listening right now, they can learn about this. And if you don't see campaign in your surrounding, you can start it easily as calling your local representative and letting them know that you care about the ocean and that you're interested in having 30% of the ocean protected by 2030. So you can easily find, the talking points, the information, the studies. And again, if there's not an organized campaign in your surroundings, specifically talking to, let's say, your governor or your representative, if you're in a different country, pick up the phone, let your representative know as easy as, this is important to me, let's protect the ocean, and let them know why. And that's how you get the ball rolling. Obviously talk to other folks and get them to do the same thing, but it's exciting because we can all do our part wherever we are.
And just to wrap this conversation, Juan, if you could tell our viewers, some of them, well, we've talked about 30 by 30, but why is the ocean so important in our climate? How does it impact our climate?
Yeah, definitely. Marcela touched on it a little bit, but the ocean is one of our greatest allies in sequestering CO2 emissions from the atmosphere, right? And it has so much carbon. Like the first meter of ocean sediments, the seafloor, has more carbon than all of the terrestrial soils of the world combined. So there's a huge amount of carbon there that if we let it just sit there, is going to continue, helping us for millennia. Now, protected areas can't help mitigate some destructive impacts that might remineralize or might disturb some of that carbon that's been saved up for millennia. So things like bottom trawling, destructive fishing practices, this kind of stuff not only steers the seafloor, disturbs some of that carbon, and some other impacts that, perhaps deforestation of mangroves is also releasing all of this carbon. So we need to be very careful in our impact, because we might turn the ocean into a climate change ally, into a climate change problem, if you will. So, the ocean has been, seen as ignored in many ways in the climate change discussions. I think that there's no way we're going to reach the Paris Climate Agreement if we don't have the ocean on our side. So, and all of the other nature ecosystems. So we need to bring those two conversations together.
We definitely have it as an ally. It is our ally, and we need to keep it that way. So we need to protect it. So thank you so much to you, Marcela, Juan, and Raimundo, for your commitment, for your leadership, for being in the front lines of this fight. Thank you so much for educating us this afternoon. You have a great of the week, and thank you so much, everybody that joined us. Have a good afternoon and a good night.
Gracias.